Having mastered the sky in familiar spaces, we unconsciously try to apply our knowledge to new, unexplored conditions, missing what nature tells us.
And only by flying in new places will you learn to be flexible and see how diverse and not constantly the air element is.
Tau-Zhetysu or Tekeli is a Mecha for landing accuracy in Kazakhstan.
There are 2 starts there. The first and main one is located right next to the Tau-Zhetysu Hotel, and its height is 200 meters and 6 kilometers to the east. The second start is 800 meters high.
And on the other side of these mountains, from the southern exposure, there is a start as a Su with a height of 700 meters.
I was in Tekeli for the first time back in the year 2011, when I came to a competition on landing accuracy. And even then, not being able to fly, I managed to come high above the target, but I couldn't do any big routes.
From those ancient times, there were disputes whether it was possible to hold cross-country competitions in the same Tesu. And thanks to the organizer David Virshki, General Director Alexey Tarasov, and the Alga Paragliding Club, the first cross-country competitions with the Phi Category 2 were held. We had to cover 300 kilometers from Almaty to Tekeli, and in time it was about 4 or 5 hours. And we checked into the California Hotel in the village of Rudnichny, Su. In January of the 23rd year, thanks to Mr. Jin, I was able to transfer to my first DAVINCI Tango. It was a long process, mostly psychologically, as I was afraid that something would go wrong. A lot of people have told me that with my 66-hour flight, it's too early to transfer to Tseshko. But thanks to Pasha and his special approach to my training, as well as a gradual entry into the weather, I managed to fly on the tank for my first 17 hours. And by the beginning of these competitions, my flight time was 89 hours.
Our organization is quite experienced in conducting competitions, but this is like our first experience in conducting competitions on Kriskanted. For me, this is a very solemn day today, because in the 15th year, I said I quit doing precision. I will train a piece. I want us to have a competition here. The participants included 19 athletes from Kazakhstan, including Alexey Tarasov, well known as a theorist, who received a Kazakh license.
On a flying day, we were given a short trial task in 5 ppms, and its distance was 26 kilometers. Since the main start is only 200 meters high, and this is very small for a crux, the organizers gave us the opportunity to restart, although this is usually prohibited.
And also an innovation, at least in our films, was the elapsed time formula, where the calculation of results and time is calculated according to the individual time of the pilot, unlike the flight tour or race, where time begins to count from the opening of the beginning of the special section. Let's start dragging around. She came. Well, yes, there's the weather, look what it is. And we are standing there.
With the change of wing class came certain difficulties that I did not encounter on the Bash. And this is not a bonus. The wing fork has not changed for me, but I still noticed a difference when I lacked the cherished 6 or 7 kilograms, and it would seem that I am still above the middle. But when you are closer to the top on the Seshka, it feels very, very good and manifests itself in maneuverability and control. Therefore, now my suspension weighs 15 kilograms, and I can't lift it without help. But despite all these inconveniences and sufferings, they are more than compensated for in the air. However, because of this ballast, I was very afraid of restarting, because if this happens, it will be another adventure.
The lower the height of the start, the higher the probability of error, because the flows are formed only from a height of 100 to 150 meters, and it is very important not to fly away from the start, but to wait for the flow there.
It was the first time I flew so low to the ground, and probably that's why I got the idea that the wind is stronger in Thacker, because I clearly saw my speed.
After a long time of survival in the thermic, I still managed to get up and break away from the others.
I looked at Pasha and thought, well, how did it happen? We were at the same height, and after futile attempts, I saw Denis Klimov and decided to follow him. Well, it didn't work out for me here either. Denis Klimov caught on the stream and flew, and I, along with Sergey Grishko and other pilots, still could not gain enough altitude for the transition.
I was doing much better, but at any moment, I could make a mistake and fail to Loro. I didn't have a lot of flying experience here, and I couldn't know for sure if this altitude would be enough for me to cross or not. I decided to try to fly after the leaders. I arrived at the minimum altitude, and apart from very, very weak zeros, I didn't see anything there. And guided by my experience, I decided to fly further along the foothills in search of a better thermal. In the Tekeli, the pronounced triggers are very clearly visible, but after checking them all, I found nothing. And after losing 200 meters, I was almost at the height of the start and was extremely surprised that I saw Yura Bedin next to me. After all, he was much taller than me, and thanks to the fact that I was not there alone, I had hope. And together with Yura, we were able to center the flow and gain 1,800 meters, where the theorist caught up with us, and together we flew to the ridge in the direction of the PPMA. I haven't flown this far here yet, but flying in other places like India and Nepal suggested that thermodynamics is possible in this place. I was not mistaken, but I could not stay in it for a long time, and I flew to look for the usual thermals.
It was my first time flying in dynamics, and of course I knew the rules of divergence. But it's one thing to know, and another thing to apply. And what you are about to see, I would like no one to ever see it. It was dangerous piloting on my part, and it could lead to sad consequences. The pilot has no right to be confused, but it happened to me after numerous passes of dynamics, some to the left, some to the right, constantly trying to predict what would happen next. I got into a situation where I could no longer turn to the right, because I thought it was already low. To the left, I saw that Natasha was already flying towards me, and I could already see Sasha turning towards me. I am very ashamed of this situation, especially in front of Sasha. The horror of what happened, I realized only after watching these shots, and what should have been done to prevent such a situation, and all that was needed was just to repeat Sasha's trajectory.
Unfortunately, this is the most common mistake of flying in dynamics. A lot of pilots make it and crash. The most important rule of flights in dynamics, and flights in general, is to be understandable, predictable, and not throw out anything unusual. Continuing to study the slopes of Tau-Zhetysu, I pressed myself against the relief in search of a thermodynamic. As we know, there are several types of updrafts. The first and most common in our latitudes is the thermal updraft. This is the air that heats up near the ground, becomes lighter, and begins to fly up. The second type is dynamic upstream. It is less common in our country, which is why Laura had difficulties with this. It is formed when the wind flows around the relief, which allows you to deflect its vector upwards. And the third type is thermodynamic updraft. From its name, you can already guess that this is a combination of the two previous types when the air flowing along the mountain simultaneously heats up and acquires additional strength. But this phenomenon is quite rare and directly depends on the terrain. When it's cool, the thermodynamics is stable. As soon as the mountain begins to flatten out, the thermodynamics immediately ends. And as soon as this happened, I had to look for streams again, and as a result, I fell very far behind the theorist and Klimov.
I still couldn't get out of the speaker. Maybe I didn't have enough experience, or the weather just ended, but I was already landing. Kapitz was in the situation. The first flying day flew by. I couldn't choose theorist. Your juror returns after taking that far point.
Having gained the necessary height, I took a point, caught up with the theorist, but then a tactical mistake was made. I did not fly by optimization, but decided to lengthen the route by pressing against the mountains. However, it didn't help me, and I never got to the finish line. On the first test day, the weather turned out just fine, and everyone was impatient to get into the air as soon as possible. We start from this point 01. The task for the first task was set in 9 ppms. It was similar to the training one, but it was more difficult tactically. The task was set according to the formula, ellipsit time, individual time, and its length was 27 kilometers. The spiral is left today. first one who was lucky to get into a good phase was Sergey Grishko, but he could not hold this position for a long time because very soon Yuri Bedin and Denis Klimov, as well as Alexey Tarasov, Alexey Tulovsky, and Maxim Shpati caught up with him. Holy shit, maybe you should take it there. Put it on there.
I don't have. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Well, then yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. It was very difficult for me to choose the right time to start, but everything is simple for Canara. The sooner you start, the better. But that's not how it works in Tekeli. No matter how many times I have not started from 200, I have never flown from there. Pasha and I started at the same time.
When I met the first pluses and started to turn around, I saw Natasha Zotova and Laura flying towards me. Due to the fact that the flow was very weak and the space for maneuvers is quite small, I decided to go to the side, to where Sergey Grishko unscrewed for the first time today, and in case of failure, go back to the girls.
Seeing this, I had a few seconds to decide whether to follow Pasha or stay in the stream. In the end, I decided that the stream is more reliable.
When I flew up to the slope where the thermic should come from, I saw that a flock of crows took off, and I thought, well, that's it, the meat grinder is about to begin. But when I flew a little closer, I saw that they had all landed, and disappointed in this, I decided to return to the girls. Once below the start, I had to get as close to the terrain as possible, and hope that I would have time to get to where they were spinning. I felt that the flow was somewhere nearby, but it was very weak. Apparently I was where it was just being formed, and I had no choice but to fly along the terrain further, where I have at least some height, but I did not meet anything below 150 meters. I didn't experience any great emotions, because I knew that I had a second chance. I just need to land as soon as possible, get ready to have time to stop by again. But to my surprise, I was not alone, and a little later, 5 or 6 pilots landed with me.
Natasha Zotova and I managed to get out, and I was so glad to finally see the quarry. It was the first time that I got out of 200. It was very easy to fly to the farthest point because we were going downwind, and when it came time to turn around and take the next PM, I should have remembered what was said at the briefing.
We are flying as fast as possible until the end of the special section.
So, not this moment.
It is more profitable to go, of course, along the ridge, not along the optimization line, but here.
For some reason, I flew away from the ridge and started looking for streams in the foothills. Probably, I have just formed the habit of flying in Almaty, which means flying along the ridge to the foothills and looking for the best and fattest stream there. But it didn't work that day in Tekeli, and Natasha and I flew back and forth, trying to find something, but everything was in vain. When she landed, I realized that my situation was not much better. I decided to try to take the next ppm, and only then gain altitude. I wanted to twist it so much to fly further. Yes, here is a failure and landing. I think it's not bad. We flew half the route.
The second time we stopped by, the first time we bombed. Now we will start again. Having gathered myself very quickly, and without waiting for any phase, I immediately started and immediately got into the fly. And Denis Klimov flew to me from above, who went almost the entire distance. He had only a couple of ppms left. Thanks to the clouds, I roughly understood what the base of the streams should be today. And when I met the current, which then intensified then weakened, I patiently waited for it to carry me to the very top. And I gained 2,700 meters, just a little short of reaching the lower boundary of the cloud. Having a huge margin in height, I had the opportunity to think a little. It is clear that it was necessary to fly along the ridge to the very end, but then optimization lay along the foothills, which I did not understand. But suddenly, in the valley, I saw a small cloud that had just begun to form, just in the place where 2 ppms could be taken one after the other, and I decided not to push my luck, but to take advantage of the chance that nature gave me. Thanks to this technique, I quite simply managed to take all the most difficult points and returned to the ridge at the height of the relief. But unfortunately, it didn't add speed to me. Together with Alexander Fedorov, we flew in thermodynamics up to the quarry, where we split up. There was a very weak flow, so Sasha decided to fly further on the task. I was hoping that I would be able to gain altitude under 2,700 again. Gaining even 100 meters higher, and squeezing out a full axle, I went through the rest of the glide. Having finished at a height, I decided to turn on the camera to capture this moment. When I tried to insert the wire into the connector, the camera comes off and flies down. My soul immediately flew into my heels, because this flight could cost me very dearly, and even this heavy camera could fly into someone's head.
Чё, как? Да, ноги свело.
Да полетали! Спортивное мероприятие.
On the radio, I heard the negotiations of pilots who can't land, and I just had a fig of altitude. And I thought, why not fly to Koksa, since there was such an opportunity? In 40 minutes, I flew about 30 kilometers, but I was afraid to cling to the southern side of the mountains, as I did not fly there. And after flying into the valley on the wind, I sometimes accelerated to 70 kilometers per hour, and this magical flight was crowned with success. I was only 1.5 kilometers short of the hotel, and my landing was almost vertical, but surprisingly soft. Although a very strong wind was blowing on landing. The first time I flew with Coke, it blows hard, I can't even assemble a wing. I will put Petrova's meatballs in the donut and fold there already. By the way, I dedicated this flight to Laura. There's that orange building over there. There it is visible.
The leaders of the first task were the first Alexey Tarasov, the second Sergey Grishko, and the third Denis Klimov.
And among the women, the first was Natalia Telemasova, the second was Alexandra Korzova, and the third was Laura Venchik.
The task for the second pelvis was assigned to us after 7 ppms, and for the first time, we had to fly to Koksa. The total distance was 57.5 kilometers. At the start, we waited for some time, because there was no wind, and if there is no wind, then there is no thermal either. We sent Alexey Tarasov to investigate the first one, though unsuccessfully, and he soon landed under the mountain. And after a while, a normal wind finally blew, and we gradually started to start everything. The first 6 pilots were entering a successful phase, and at the time of our takeoff, they were already taking the starting cylinder. Oh, tornado, tornado, tornado. It's like he's gone. Well, the wind swirled around us. Yes. Wait.
With a camera.
Is everything okay? We scored very well over the start, the flow was powerful, and I knew for sure that now we would unscrew it as much as possible and fly to take the special section. I watched Pasha, because yesterday he showed a very good result, and I decided that today I would follow him, and then I see that he breaks down, I drop everything and fly quickly to him. Indeed, there is also thermodynamics ahead. What, are we drowning? Of course, I remembered in time, because thermodynamics goes further, and then I see that Pasha turns around, and I understand that some bullshit is happening. It means something is wrong, and there is nothing there, but it's all gone. It's all gone, and it's all over. I'm flying on like this.
And I really just wanted to stretch out in search of a more powerful stream, but when I look at Laura has already flown. I think, well, don't throw her, especially since we seem to have enough altitude. 250 above the start should be enough. We arrived right next to each other at the relief level. We found a weak stream, but it was quite narrow, and it was unpleasant to be there together. And I decided to fly to explore, in search of a better thermal.
The flow was really audacious, but for myself I understood that this was just my last chance.
But when I came back, I was a little lower, and the flow was no longer there. I didn't hope for something that would be simple. After all, the terrain there is very much flattened, so I had to fly very low above the ground. My goal was the slide, from which we unscrewed with Eurobedon on the first day, but having arrived there, my hopes evaporated. Immediately after landing, I thought about restarting, but due to the fact that we had been waiting for the weather for a very long time, the ground launch was closing and I would not have had time.
I managed to get into a good position, and if you look at the track, then I'm just walking perfectly. And the only thing I had to do was snuggle up to the thermodynamic and fly in it. The day before, Pasha and I sorted out the mistakes, and I knew what to do. I knew how to fly. But why did I make such a stupid mistake? I saw pilots who were going higher, and I thought that I just didn't have enough altitude, and I urgently needed to gain it. Otherwise, it's all unsafe. And I'm like they're going to slap me in the rotor, which is capits later. I still have to study and learn how to fly properly in the mountains. And when I started to lose altitude and met a stream that took me just the other way from the route, I began to sin that it was all Pasha's fault, that I threw the stream, flew down the bottoms, and because of him I am now suffering. I understood that most likely I was going to land, and I also felt a strong wind, because I got into a gorge between two mountains in the so-called pipe. I noticed for myself one single large field that was downwind, because I could not go back against the wind, and even if I had decided, my landing would probably have been on trees. But I wasn't going to give up. I had a plan that I would now fly to my possible landing, and there would be a cool stream. I would, of course, unscrew it. Well, not like that. Of course, he wasn't there, and I was already building a forest for landing. It's nice to think that I was the only one who ever sat there at all, because it was a fenced area. Fortunately, I didn't meet the owner of the field. I liked the landing in principle, but the only thing was that there was a lot of broken glass, and I was afraid that I would somehow inadvertently tear my new wing. I felt great bitterness and disappointment, because I sat down, because I was not tired at all. I was ready to fly on. Bad thoughts and feelings just ate away at me from the inside. I sat down completely, one might say, not on the route, because as if I took the extreme point and had to fly in the opposite direction. But I didn't have enough height to cross, and I was afraid that I would sit down the same way as yesterday, and therefore I tried to find a stream, clean up. In the end, it didn't work out for me. The leaders of the second task were the first, Alexey Tarasov, the second, Denis Klimov, and the third, Maxim Shpady. They are the only ones who reached the finish line.
And among the women, the first was Natalia Zodova, the second was Laura Venchik, and the third was Natalia Telemisova.
And what? And what are you shooting?
On the 1st of July, when we arrived at the start, a very strong wind was blowing, and the organizers decided to make a rest day.
We were taken to a beautiful place on the river, a soup, where there were baths, and we had a good steam there, rested and had a great time.
But it's better to go there once than to tell it 100 times.
The next day we were taken to the 800. The girls rode like royalty, and the guys rode on a gazelle.
This is some kind of capits. No, no. And we spilled water. It's literally right here. That's why they're not. So far, it seems like a good levy.
I saw cross-country competitions for the first time back in 2019, when the first unofficial Idler Cup was held, and this place is really special for me.
Our task will be similar to the day before yesterday. Here we are now at the start of Soyuz 02. The task for the third task was in 7 ppms, and it was necessary to fly through the Koksu Valley, then return to the mountain, and land at the California Hotel, and the total distance was 61 kilometers. In sports, the chair and the committee have already made a decision where to move the start window.
My dad's advice. Don't think twice, I want the luxury life. My beauty can lose it, I'll use it. I'll take what I want. Oh yeah.
I got a good phase and immediately began to gain in streams. I thought that my failures were solely due to the fact that I did not have enough height. For the first time in these competitions, I managed to fly to Gagli, because the task was such that it was necessary to take a point and go back. And by the way, compared to Ushganer, it seems to me that the weather in Tekeli is much milder. Because flying there on the Tango, I was absolutely not afraid. Have you noticed that I'm finally pushing axle? And not for 5 seconds, but all the time. And all because I somehow accidentally flew into the rotor and flew out of there for a very long time. And Pasha told me on the radio, if you don't push axle, then you will fly like Beshko. And at that moment, something clicked in my head, and I began to press axles half all the time on the transitions.
This year, for the first time, I started flying with a shuttlecock, or as it is also called a falauka, or whose bench. And as a payback for beautiful shots, I had a false start associated with it for the first time. I want to say right away that this is a rather unsafe thing, and if something happens to the wing and it flies into the slings, it can prevent the wing from opening. But as a flight operator, I take these risks for you. So like and subscribe to our channel. Every time I found myself in conditions where time was pushing me, I made the same mistake. A lot of fuss, unnecessary movements, which led to a landing. I tried to calm down because it depended on what distance I could fly, but I wanted to fly to the finish line. To do this, I had to wind up each thread to its maximum and not rush anywhere. It does not fly at a low altitude. I took pictures of Fenchik, a copter. Now I'm going to take off the GoProshki. As everyone knows, there are no two identical flights, just as there are no two identical flows. And it's not consistency that's the hardest thing about cross-country. And so when I noticed Dan, who is not spinning in thermodynamics, and comparing him with others who are spinning to the base, losing a lot of time, I understand that I urgently need to change my strategy and accelerate. When I went to the thermodynamics zone, I thought, well, we all flew this slide, now everyone will fly in an even formation. Seeing Laura and Natasha above me, I had no doubt that they would use the same tactics.
I watched Pasha from above and thought, damn, how unlucky he was. He was going very low. What, a thermodynamicist? I haven't heard that at all. Streams rule.
Laura has been flying on her own for a long time and does not accept my tips in flight. I could only hint by asking her on the radio in the hope that she would notice me and understand that she needed to fly after me.
But the hint was not understood, and then I see how Natasha Zotova is being fronted.
Whoa. Whoa. Natasha is well done. So well, I'll reset the axle since this is the case.
I immediately tensed up, because it could have been waiting for me, but flying there, this turbulence was no longer there. It was Capets. Natasha Telemasova, who had already learned thermodynamics, caught up with us very quickly. So the three of us flew to take the next ppm. When we arrived at the quarry, we made a very grave mistake. Instead of snuggling up to him and finding the flow there, which was exactly what we needed, for some reason, we began to move away from him, and without encountering anything on our way, we arrived at 200. At this point, we split up. Natasha Telemasova managed to grab hold of the stream, and Natasha Zotova and I went to the right and tried to find something there. But our wanderings did not bring any result, and we had to land. And Natasha Telemasova managed to take a point and soon also landed, just like Maxim Shpati before us. And I think most likely, either the phase was wrong, or the weather in this place just died. Well, either we're just losers. I just folded it there. Damn, I shit myself again. No, that's when I folded it the same way.
How nice it is here. Ha. And I didn't click the stream over the quarry, and, having gained 2,100 meters, went to the transition to the next point. I flew along the optimization line, because I was sure that I would be able to overcome most of the gentle ridges. Arriving at Yura and Dan, I found myself at the very bottom. I saw that Yura managed to unscrew it, but Denis, being only 50 meters above me, throws the stream and flies further downwind. And watching Dan just use up altitude and fly very low to the next trigger, I decide that I'm not going anywhere from here until I gain a little altitude. While I was hanging, I thought, what are we doing wrong? Because this is a very good trigger, and there were fields ahead, but they were separated by a small embankment. But what if the flow comes down much earlier, and only the tail reaches us? But my flight to the valley often ended with a landing, and while hesitantly doing push-ups from the mountains, I found weak knots that led me to the long-awaited flow.
And the leaders of this race, Sergey Grishko and Alexey Tarasov, had already flown half of the route and were taking the 4th ppm. And Alexey Tarasov is one of the few who continued the race.
Я думаю, его баланчик заинтересовал. Спасибо, что показал поток.
Having gained up to a height of 2500, I flew to point T18, and taking it, I realized that just like that, I would not be able to fly to the next cylinder. I decided to take a little windier to the Valley of Tornadoes. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that Yura Bedin was flying up from below with incredible speed, but he found this stream from 100 meters away. Then, we were waiting for a very long transition to the next point T30. When we were approaching the point, we split up. I took a little windier, and Yura went for optimization. It was at this moment that I was in the second position, although I did not know about it. It seemed to me that everyone had already overtaken me, and was flying in a tight group to the finish line. But in front of me was only Alexey Tarasov, who was now standing in the set. I easily managed to fly to the next thermal, but when I finished twisting it, I saw that the stream was creeping along the mountains. And in Almaty, there is nothing to do in the mountains in such a situation. I flew through the foothills strictly along the optimization line, avoiding falling into the rotor, and in search of a new thermal. But the southern exposure allows you to warm up the flow, so that they go up the mountain, turning the wind direction. This was what Alexey Tarasov took advantage of, and I, not finding thermals in a straight line, merged the entire height, before reaching the finish line only 10 kilometers, thanks to the Paracap replay. So I saw that the theorist took a stream that I didn't get to quite a bit.
The leaders of the third task were the first and only finisher Alexey Tarasov, the second Pavel Venchik, and the third Yuri Bedin.
And among the women, the first was Natalia Telemasova, the second was Laura Venchik, and the third was Natalia Izodova. A special excerpt for those who still managed to spend up to the valley to their father. Do not forget that the main thing is safety. We will not point fingers, but be extremely careful always. And here we are meanwhile, seeing approaching the TV. I thought we'd say a thunderstorm. Natasha, on the Brit. Attention about the sports part of our task today.
The task for the 4th pelvis was assigned to us after 7 ppms, and its total distance was 37.7 kilometers. There were already several pilots in the air, but at that moment the wind picked up, and the launch was temporarily closed.
I've never trusted weather forecasts, but they've been getting more accurate lately. But using the Windy app, I can observe the weather in real time, namely a satellite image of thunderstorm formations. And on this day, Windy showed that there is a strengthening of the wind up to 10 meters per second. Other forecasts refuted this.
The wind then increased, then subsided. Of course, the start was then closed, then opened, but no one was in a hurry to start.
Looking at the pilots who follow the route and not seeing the danger, I really wanted to start, but I was afraid that if I did, Laura would follow me.
Maxim Shpady, Sergey Grishko, and Alexey Tarasov have already taken the farthest point along the route. Denis Klimov was spinning over the start, and at times hung in space. The decision was given to the organizers very hard because a level 2 was passed along the route, and this is still considered acceptable for passing the task. But in the end, the wind increased so much that code words sounded into the radio.
Here's the director, stop task, and everything is in the air without knowing it.
Everyone has already relaxed, started to gather, but then we hear Maxim Shpady reports that Alexey Tarasov has fallen.
Everyone, can anyone hear me? A flat addition has fallen low above the ground. I do not know what is wrong with it.
A team gathered for the rescue, and after a while, it was possible to quickly find Alexey Tarasov, thanks to Maxim Shpady, who sat down nearby.
When we got to him, he felt fine, was in a good state of mind, even joked, but complained of pain in his leg. On the same day, he was taken to the Tau-Zhetysu hospital, and the next morning, he was already in Almaty and was waiting for his operation.
As a result, he had 2 fractures of the pelvis and a fracture of the femoral neck.
Now, there is already a tsu on Tau. The valley is shorter than all the dust covered. Apparently soon, in general, in the course of zero with us, all this fits. That's it. The wind is getting stronger, or it's pinning her there. I just came out here. He's mine. It was more than tens of centimeters. She's flexible. First, this little one that holds. And only the wing was not drunk. Let's try it slowly. Here it hung. The trees were almost not even damaged. Max tried. Yes, as little sawing as possible.
We had one more competitive day left, so we were ready to stand at the start.
I immediately start with the sports part, because it is very important right now. Well, here it is, our sports part for today. Let's look at yesterday first. We have a difficult situation with the calculation of points. Vska told us that we had a valid day, but at the same time, everyone got 0. Therefore, we have a formal question about refereeing. We haven't solved it collectively yet, but Mikhail Krapovin advised in such a way that he was able to. I personally don't mind. Me too. He had an extreme day of general competition. Therefore, today, we are planning an award ceremony and the closing of the competition at 5:30. Congratulations to everyone. Competitions are first in the history of the same party. Competitions are closed.
And we're alive.
Wow, it's coming up now. Not that kind of shnyaga over there.
These competitions were very hard for me mentally. After all, at home on average, I flew 40 kilometers, and here, it was a maximum of 16. It was hard for me to admit to myself that I screwed up completely. But back in winter, when I was transplanting to Tseshka, Pasha and I had a conversation that, perhaps, this season I would have a drawdown. And then I said, yes, I understand everything, of course. The main thing is not to be afraid to fly on this wing, but it didn't turn out the way I expected. But after a while, I am very grateful for this experience, because if it wasn't for him, I would never have learned to analyze my mistakes. And I was especially pleased that when I landed, I understood where and what I had done wrong. Tekeli became a challenge for me. On the one hand, they are soft and comfortable, and on the other hand, they are so complex and incomprehensible. And thanks to this, I have a new goal to fly Tekeli ESSC.
And for me, this place has also become unique, because I do not know of any other places where you can start from the north, and then fly around the mountain, and snuggle up to its southern part, and not get into the rotor. And usually all my achievements go through a lot of work, but in Tekeli, on the contrary, I managed to relax, and achieve my goals without much difficulty.
Alexey Tarasov became the champion of Kazakhstan, Denis Klimov took the 2nd place, and Sergey Grishko the 3rd.
And in the women's competition, the 1st place was won by Natalia Telemasova, the 2nd by Natalia Azotova, and the 3rd by Laura Venchik.
The winner in the sports class was Pavel Venchik, the 2nd place Alexey Tarasov, and the 3rd Sergey Makovsky. The winner in the fan class was Alexey Tarasov, the 2nd place Natalia Telasova, and the 3rd Alexander Fedorov. The 1st place in the series class was taken by Denis Klimov, the 2nd by Sergey Grishko, and the 3rd by Pavel Venchik.
And among the juniors, Laura Venchik took the 1st place, David Virshki was the 2nd, and Adel Niazova was the 3rd.
And also, in the 24th year, the International Tau-Zhetysu competitions will be held from the 20th to the 26th of June, and the Open Championship of Kazakhstan from the 9th to the 16th of August.
And those who plan to attend the Almaty competitions can take tickets a week earlier and become one of the discoverers who will mark places with their tracks where no one has ever flown before.
And we express our special gratitude to those who support us financially. These are David Virshki, Inso Jin, Igor Zygan, Konstantin Zakharev, Alyona and Dmitry Roth, Irina Lezinch, Ilyas Sagadev, Dmitry Wildholz. Special thanks to those who helped in the creation of the film: Taras Korzev, Maxim Shpady, Alexey Tarasov, Natalia Taramasova, Yuri Bedin, and to all those who support us in one way or another. Your kind words remain in our hearts. Thanks to the California Hotel and the administrator Alyona for creating a cozy atmosphere and delicious cuisine. And of course, thank you to Sergey Grishko for insisting on your own, and cross-country competitions in Tekeli became possible.
С нами Игорь любил мечтать, на парапланах в Тау-Зhetysu улетать. Он для друзей своих готов отдать всю душу. С нами Наталья, медали с ней, все приготовила как для людей. И поэтому такой компании возьмем, да и припремся в Тау. С нами Денский, с нами Тарас, бухает на равнине, не отстает от нас. Его рецепт вискарик с колой, ноу-хау. С нами Леха, с нами Максим, совсем не пьют ребята, мы без них тусим. От них, видать, по кайфу только лишь одни полеты.
Без слова.
А мы не только любим полетать, но прибухнуть слегка и на гитаре поиграть. И поэтому такой компании возьмем, да и припремся в Тау. А если нам с погодой совсем не повезет, вдруг здесь никто не курит и ничего не пьет, и зачем тогда такой компании возьмем, да и припремся в Тау?
Тау?
Что такое Тау? Красивое местечко, где можно полетать, друзей своих воздушных, где можно повидать. И тогда такой компании возьмем, да и припремся в Тау. Ну и Сорева мы провели, ребята, просто вау!
Серега красавчик! Вообще молодец!